you dogs! Row! To the shore!
How did Vikings keep warm while sleeping in their icy homes? These discoveries by historians are shocking everyone. What was a night like in 9th century Scandinavia? Outside, an icy blizzard rages. The temperature drops to unimaginable lows, and snow covers everything in sight. Inside a long Viking house, dimly lit by a hearth, dozens of people are getting ready for bed on simple wooden benches. They have no modern insulation, central heating, or down comforters. Nevertheless, they wake up in the morning to greet a new day. It wasn't just life, it was nightly survival, elevated to an art form. Their methods were ingenious in their simplicity, and based on a deep understanding of materials, the physics of heat, and the power of community. They turned their icy homes into warm cocoons, capable of withstanding the harshest winter. Watch the video to the end to find out what engineering and domestic tricks allowed the Vikings to sleep warmly while an ice storm raged outside. What if I told you that the famous Viking house, the Longhouse, was actually an ingenious machine for surviving the cold? Its design was not a whim, but the result of centuries of experience honed by the icy winds of the north. Every detail, from the foundation to the roof, worked toward one goal: preserving precious heat.
Eat this stew while it's hot.
It smells wonderful.
Careful now, don't burn yourself.
We tend to imagine these dwellings as huge, drafty halls, but that's not quite true. In many regions, especially Iceland and Greenland, longhouses were partially or completely dug into the ground. This immediately solved the wind problem and used the constant temperature of the earth as a natural insulator. The walls were the main barrier against the cold. Instead of simple wooden planks, the Vikings built massive walls of turf that could be up to 5 feet thick. These turf blocks, cut from marshy soil, were laid in layers to create an almost impenetrable barrier.
Come, little one. The hearth is warm tonight.
The turf itself had unique properties. Its dense root system held the soil together, and the air pockets inside served as excellent insulation. In winter, such a layer of turf, covered with a thick cap of snow, turned the house into a well-insulated dugout. The roof was also multi-layered. A layer of birch bark was laid on wooden rafters to serve as waterproofing. 2 or 3 layers of turf were laid on top of the birch bark to protect from wind and cold from above. The location of the house on the terrain was also an important factor. The Vikings always tried to build a longhouse so that its narrow end walls faced the prevailing winter winds. In this way, the minimum area of the house was directly exposed to icy gusts. The interior space was clearly divided into zones. On either side of the central passageway were wide raised platforms known as palar. It was on these platforms that people ate, worked, and slept, a meter above the coldest air that accumulated on the earthen floor. The structure had virtually no windows as we understand them today. Any opening was a source of enormous heat loss. Lighting and ventilation were provided mainly through a smoke hole in the roof, and low, narrow doorways that could be closed tightly. This architecture was not so much about beauty as it was about maximum functionality. Every element was designed to minimize heat loss and maximize the use of internal heat. The longhouse was not just a dwelling, but a collective refuge. This design was the result of centuries of experience honed in the struggle against the harsh climate. What modern eco-technologies do you think were actually borrowed from ancient builders? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Are you ready to learn the truth about the main source of heat? which was both a salvation and a silent threat. At the very center of the longhouse, along its entire length, was the Langeld, or long hearth. It was the beating, smoky heart of the entire dwelling. Structurally, it was not a fireplace as we know it, but rather a long, shallow trench dug directly into the earthen floor. This trench was neatly lined on both sides with flat stones. The stones served not only to maintain the shape of the hearth, but also to accumulate heat, slowly releasing it into the room. The length of this hearth was striking and could stretch for 10, 15, or even 20 meters, almost across the entire central space of the house. The fire did not burn in one compact point, but was deliberately distributed along this entire central axis. This was a key engineering decision for such an elongated structure.
Stew is hearty today.
Eat well, we have enough for the morrow.
Here, lad, take this bread.
This elongated shape was dictated by the shape of the house itself. The long Viking house was narrow and very long. A conventional round hearth simply could not heat its ends, leaving them icy and uninhabitable. The Langeld allowed for more or less uniform heating of a huge, elongated space. Heat was radiated along the entire length, creating an extended warm zone. Families living in their compartments along the walls received their share of heat from the nearest section of this common fire. This type of hearth was incredibly multifunctional. First of all, it was used to cook food constantly. Large metal cauldrons hung from chains attached to the ceiling beams above different sections of the fire, in which soups and porridges simmered for hours. Nearby, on coals or special stones, flatbread could be baked. Meat or fish was often roasted on spits set up along the fire. In fact, it was a huge communal kitchen that worked non-stop.
The gods have favored us with this feast. The meat is tender.
In addition to cooking, the hearth was the only source of light in the dark room. The windows, if there were any, were narrow slits that were tightly closed in winter. The fire of the Langeld illuminated everyday life, allowing people to do crafts, repair tools, or weave during the long winter evenings.
This carving reminds me of your father's ship.
He would have liked that. It is good work.
And of course, it was the main source of heat. All life in the house literally revolved around this fiery strip. People sat on benches facing the fire, slept with their feet toward it, and dried their wet clothes and shoes over it. Keeping this fire going was a vital task that never stopped for a minute. It was a sacred duty entrusted to all the inhabitants of the house. An extinguished hearth in winter was tantamount to disaster and could mean the death of the entire family. The fire must never be allowed to go out completely, especially during the long polar night. Someone from the household, often women or slaves, always made sure that the coals were smoldering in the hearth. At night, they were covered with a thick layer of ash, so that they would smolder slowly until morning, retaining their heat. In the morning, it was enough to fan these coals and throw in some dry kindling to make the flames flare up with renewed vigor. This was much easier than having to start a fire from scratch every time with flint and steel. Constant burning provided stable, albeit minimal, heating for the house. Fuel was a precious resource, perhaps even more valuable than food. In the wooded areas of Scandinavia, such as Norway or Sweden, this was wood. Gathering firewood was hard work all year round, requiring the efforts of all the men. Life in a longhouse was a constant balancing act between two unpleasantries: freezing in the clean air or sitting in the warmth, but suffocating. People chose the latter, learning to live in constant semi-darkness and a veil of smoke. The walls and ceiling beams inside the house were always covered with a thick layer of sticky, greasy soot. This black coating accumulated over years and decades. It ate into the wood, clothing, and even people's skin.
Look how deep the carbonization goes here, right into the heartwood.
Confirmed. The suit depth averages nearly 3 centimeters by the hearth.
This fact is irrefutably confirmed by archaeological finds. During excavations of longhouses, scientists find thick layers of soot. Analysis of preserved wooden structures shows deep penetration of combustion products into the wood structure. The air in these dwellings would be considered completely unfit for breathing by modern standards. The concentration of carcinogens and small soot particles was extreme. This was the inevitable price paid for survival in the warmth. The interior of a Viking longhouse was a dark space, smelling of smoke and grease. The light from the fire struggled to penetrate the haze. This created a special, oppressive, but at the same time lived-in atmosphere. Constant inhalation of this smoke, full of soot and carbon monoxide, inevitably affected the health of the inhabitants. Women, who spent most of the day at the hearth, and small children were particularly vulnerable. Studies of human remains from that era often reveal chronic respiratory diseases. Chronic bronchitis, emphysema, and eye problems due to constant smoke irritation were common. But in the conditions of the Ice Age, or simply the harsh Scandinavian winter, the choice was simple. On one side of the scale was the risk of chronic lung disease in the future. On the other was quick and certain death from hypothermia here and now. It was the price of survival. What do you think was more difficult, obtaining fuel for the fire or living in constant smoke? But the fire only heated the air. In the next chapter, we will reveal the secret of how the Vikings learned to store heat and use it to directly heat their sleeping quarters. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of Viking comfort. It is a technology that we would today call heated floors or hot water bottles, but it was implemented 1,000 years ago with the help of stone and fire. A simple hearth warmed the air, but that was not enough to warm the bed. The problem was obvious. A long fire burned in the center of the hall, while the sleeping benches, or palace, were located near the cold outer walls. Even if the air in the house was warm, the wooden floors and beds remained icy. Going to sleep on such a surface meant almost guaranteed freezing. The Vikings found an ingenious solution using the principle of thermal inertia. Throughout the day, while the central hearth was burning, large flat stones were heated in or near it. These were not just random cobblestones, but specially selected rocks capable of retaining heat for a long time. In the evening, when the family was getting ready for bed, these hot stones were removed from the fire. They were taken out using wooden tongs or pieces of thick leather. Safety was paramount during this operation. Then the hot stones were carefully placed in special niches or simply on the earthen floor under the wooden sleeping platforms. The heat emanating from the stones slowly rose upward. It warmed the thick floorboards, turning the icy bench into a comfortable warm bed. It was a simple but incredibly effective local heating system. It did not waste energy heating the entire giant volume of air in the house. It specifically heated the place where people would spend the night. There was another, more personal method. Smaller stones were also heated in the hearth. Then they were tightly wrapped in several layers of thick fabric or old leather so as not to burn.
The warmth from the stones will seep through the fabric, providing comfort for a long, cold night.
People took these improvised heaters with them straight to bed. They were placed at the feet or pressed against the body. Such a stone could give off heat for several hours, helping people fall asleep in comfort. This method required constant work and attention. It was necessary to monitor the stones, heat them at the right time, and move them safely. But the result was worth all the effort. The hot stone technology is a striking example of how the Vikings used the basic laws of physics to solve vital problems. They could not change the climate, but they could tame fire, making its heat serve them even after the flames in the hearth had died down. What if everything you've been taught about the Vikings is incomplete? Their main treasure was not swords or ships, but a material that we consider commonplace today: wool. It was wool that was the strategic resource that allowed an entire civilization to survive in the harsh northern climate. The wool of the northern European sheep breeds raised by the Vikings had unique properties. It consisted of two types of fibers: long, durable, and water-resistant outer hair, tog, and incredibly warm, soft inner undercoat, thel. But the main secret was lanolin, a natural fat that coated each fiber.
Wind bites hard tonight.
Ay, this fire is a true blessing. And this wool.
Lanolin made the wool virtually waterproof. It repelled moisture, whether it was rain, snow, or just dampness in the house. Thanks to this, woolen clothing and bedding did not get wet and continued to keep people warm even in very humid conditions. Wool processing was one of the main winter tasks, taking up all free time. After shearing, the wool was washed and sorted, separating the coarse hair from the soft undercoat. Then it was combed with special combs, pulling the fibers in one direction and spun into threads using a hand spindle.
All right, have, man.
The coarse outer fibers were used to make the most durable items. These included sails for dracars, ropes, fishing nets, and coarse windproof raincoats. This material was the basis of the Vikings' economy and expansion.
Silver for the amber necklace. It is too much. I will give you 2.5. This wool is perfect for the sails.
But for sleep and warmth, they used the soft inner undercoat, thel. These threads were woven into a dense, thick fabric on vertical looms. The process was slow and laborious, but the result was worth it. The key fabric for survival was vadmol. It was a dense, heavy woolen fabric that was additionally fulled after weaving, beaten and rubbed in hot water. As a result, the fibers bonded even more tightly, creating a material similar to modern felt or cloth. This vadmal was almost impervious to wind and had phenomenal thermal insulation properties. It became the standard currency in Iceland and was used to make literally everything from pants and jackets to blankets and bedspreads. Wool was everywhere. It was used to stuff pillows, make mattresses, and caulk cracks in walls. Without this versatile material, life in the north would have been simply impossible. It was the basis of survival. It's amazing how much labor went into a single square meter of fabric, isn't it? But fabric alone was not enough. In the next chapter, you will learn how the Vikings turned these fabrics into multi-layered sleeping systems. A Viking's sleeping place was not simply a bed as we understand it. It was a carefully designed, multi-layered insulation system designed to maximize body heat retention. Each layer in this system performed its own unique and irreplaceable function. As we have already mentioned, the basis was a wide wooden platform called a pall. The most important thing was that it raised the sleeping person above the earthen or stone floor. Cold air is always heavier than warm air and accumulates at the bottom, so sleeping on the floor would mean freezing. The first basic layer was laid on the bare boards of the pall. Most often, straw, dry moss, heather, or fir branches were used for this. This thick, elastic layer served two purposes. It served as a primitive spring mattress, and more importantly, created an air cushion. It is the air trapped in thousands of cavities between dry stems or branches that is one of the best heat insulators. This layer prevented the cold from the boards from rising up to the body. It also helped to remove moisture secreted by the sleeping person. Processed skins were laid on top of this plant layer. Most often, they were placed fur side down. The stiff leather side created a durable and windproof barrier, while the fur added another layer of heat-insulating air. A layer of thick felt, or several layers of coarse wadmal, was spread over the skins. This was the actual mattress. Its purpose was to provide softness and completely insulate the sleeper from the cold base. Only on top of this complex structure was the bed laid out as we understand it. These were sheets made of softer but still dense woolen or linen fabric. Linen was preferred for its hygiene, but wool was warmer. The sleeper covered themselves from above. Their own outer cloak was most often used as a blanket. Viking cloaks were large, rectangular pieces of very dense woolen fabric, which were ideal for this purpose. If it was very cold, they covered themselves with several layers. This could be a cloak, and on top of it, another heavy woolen blanket. The principle of layering worked here too. The air trapped between the layers of fabric kept them warmer than a single thick blanket. This whole system turned the sleeping area into a real cocoon. It was designed not to heat the surrounding space, but to retain the minimum amount of heat generated by the human body itself. Every element, from straw to cloak, was part of a unified survival strategy. What I am about to show you is essentially the first sleeping bag in history. The Vikings invented it 1,000 years before modern mountaineers. When wool alone was not enough, they turned to the most effective insulator known to mankind: fur. Processed skins were not only a valuable commodity, but also a vital household item. In Scandinavian conditions, they were indispensable for protection against extreme cold. They were used both as clothing and as the main element of bedding. Skins with long, thick fur were especially prized. They were used to make heavy blankets. Several such skins were sewn together to create a huge, massive blanket capable of covering several people at once. Fur has the unique ability to trap a large amount of air between its fibers. This trapped air was heated by body heat and served as an unmatched insulator. Wool worked on the same principle, but fur was often even more effective. The weight of such blankets also played a role. They fit snugly against the body and other layers of bedding. This prevented cold air from penetrating under the blanket and displacing the warm air. But there was a more sophisticated design, which is mentioned in the Scandinavian sagas. It was called a hudfat. This word can be translated as leather bag, or bag made of skins. In essence, it was a sleeping bag. It was sewn from several large skins, with the fur facing inward. A person would climb into this bag whole, like into a cocoon. Only the head remained outside, and the neck of the bag could be tightened with a cord. It was a personal refuge from the cold. Even if the temperature in the longhouse dropped to almost zero, it was possible to sleep warm inside such a bag. This was especially important for those who slept alone or were traveling. Can you imagine sleeping in such a cocoon? But even the warmest skins were useless without the right clothing. In the next chapter, we will find out what Vikings actually slept in. There is a common myth that people in the Middle Ages slept without clothes, possibly due to a misinterpretation of bathing traditions. For Viking-era Scandinavia, where dark and cold winters could last for months, and the temperature inside a longhouse barely stayed above freezing, this would have been a fatal mistake. Sleep was not rest, but a continuation of the hourly struggle for survival. Sleeping naked in such a climate would lead to rapid hypothermia, even under the thickest furs. The body simply could not compensate for the loss of heat in the fight against the icy air that penetrated from all sides. Therefore, they prepared for nighttime rest as carefully as they did for going to sea or into battle. The Vikings slept in their clothes, but these were not the same clothes they wore during the day. Their daytime clothes, made of coarse wool or leather, absorbed all the hardships of the day. They were damp from work, sweat, and melted snow that had fallen on them outside. Even if a person was not caught in a blizzard, ordinary physical work in the house or outside caused perspiration. In the smoky, humid air of a long house, this moisture did not evaporate completely, but remained in the fabric. It turned clothing into a cold, sticky compress that clung to the body. Going to bed in damp clothes is the quickest and surest way to get deadly hypothermia. Moisture has tremendous thermal conductivity, drawing heat from the body dozens of times faster than dry air. Sleeping in wet clothes would turn the bed into an icy trap. Therefore, before going to bed, there was a strict ritual of changing clothes in every home. It was as much a rule of hygiene and survival as washing your hands before eating. Daytime clothes, damp and inevitably smelling of smoke and sweat, were carefully removed. These clothes were not thrown away. They were carefully hung on special poles or ropes under the ceiling, as close as possible to the long hearth. The heat from the fire and the rising smoke slowly dried and disinfected the fabric, preparing it for the next day. Instead, they put on special night clothes. These never left the living area and were kept in a dry, safe place. Most often, these were personal wooden chests that stood at the head of the sleeping bench and also served as a seat during the day. The basis of the nightwear was a long shirt, or surca. It was a versatile garment, similar to a tunic, worn by both men and women. It was long enough to cover most of the body, often reaching the knees or even the ankles. It was most often made of linen, although woolen versions were also available for particularly harsh conditions. Linen was preferred for underwear for several reasons. First, it was relatively soft on the body after numerous washings and wear, unlike the rather prickly wool of the era. Second, linen was hygienic and wick. On top of this basic linen shirt, if the house became particularly cold, another looser tunic was worn. Frosty nights, when the fire in the hearth weakened towards morning, required additional precautions. This second layer was almost always wool. Wool, unlike linen, has a unique property. It continues to warm even when it absorbs a certain amount of moisture, up to 30% of its weight. This was due to the structure of the wool fiber, which retained air pockets even when wet. This combination, linen next to the body to wick away moisture and wool on top for insulation, was an ideal multi-layer system. A huge amount of heat, up to 30% according to modern estimates, escapes through an uncovered head. This is due to the intense blood supply to the brain. The Vikings, being practical and attentive to their bodies, knew this well from experience. They understood that sleeping with an uncovered head in a room where steam was coming out of their mouths was simply unwise. It would negate all efforts to keep the body warm. A cold head would cause the whole body to freeze. Therefore, sleeping with a head covering was not a whim or part of fashion. It was an absolute, universal norm, as natural as wearing shoes outside. Leaving your head uncovered meant voluntarily losing the most valuable heat. It could be a simple woolen cap, reminiscent of modern hats. It could be knitted or sewn from several pieces of fabric. The main thing was that it fit snugly around the head, reliably covering the ears, another area critical for heat loss. Sometimes, instead of a separate cap, a hood was used, which was part of the upper night tunic. Such a hood could simply be thrown over the head when going to bed. It also reliably protected the neck and back of the head from drafts that could shoot through the neck. One of the simplest and most effective ways to keep warm was completely free and available to everyone. It was the warmth of another person. In Viking culture, which was focused on the extended family and collectivism, sleeping together was not a whim, but a basic survival strategy. The longhouse was not just a dwelling, but a dormitory. Several generations lived under one roof. The elders, their adult, married offspring, and other relatives. Individual space was a luxury that no one could afford, nor did anyone seek it. The sleeping platforms, or palace, were not designed for one person. They were wide, 2 to 3 meters long, and stretched along the entire wall. The whole family slept on these platforms, side by side. The principle is simple. One body gives off a certain amount of heat. 2 bodies give off twice as much, but they do not lose it twice as fast because they are in contact with each other. The surface area that gives off heat into the cold air is reduced. Family members went to bed together. It was not only a social act, but also a thermal necessity. People huddled together, sharing warmth. In addition, they shared bedding. It is much more effective to cover 3 or 4 people with one huge fur blanket than to cover each person separately. Under such a common dome, a single microclimate was created, which was maintained by collective heat. This method was especially important for the most vulnerable members of society. Although we will not go into detail, it is obvious that in such a system, everyone survived together. The elderly and the weak could always count on the warmth of those who were healthier. This way of sleeping was the norm. There are no mentions in sagas and chronicles that this was considered uncomfortable. It was as natural as breathing or eating. The warmth generated by several bodies was a key factor in survival during the most severe frosts. When the fire in the hearth died down in the morning and the stones under the bench cooled down, it was the warmth of the person sleeping next to them that kept them from freezing. Thus, the very social structure of the Vikings, based on the extended family, was directly integrated into their strategy for combating the cold. They survived not as individuals, but as a single, warm organism. Survival in the cold is not only about external insulation, but also about the constant work of the internal stove, the human metabolism. In order for the body to generate heat, it needs fuel. The Vikings understood this perfectly well, and their winter diet was designed to provide the body with the maximum amount of slow energy. The Viking diet was high in calories, especially during the winter months. The need to survive in the cold required enormous energy expenditure. The diet was based on foods rich in fats and proteins. These included fatty sea fish, dried and salted, as well as meat. Animal fats were not the enemy, but the main source of concentrated energy. Fat is a long burning fuel that breaks down slowly, releasing heat for many hours. Carbohydrates were also important. These were mainly whole grain porridges made from barley or rye, as well as root vegetables such as turnips. They provided the quick energy needed to work throughout the day. Eating before bedtime played a special role. It was almost always a hot meal. The last meal of the day was often a thick, rich soup or hot porridge eaten just before going to bed. Hot food served 2 purposes. First, it physically warmed the body from the inside. Second, it started the digestive process, which itself generates heat. Hot drinks also played an important role. It wasn't always just water. Vikings drank hot herbal teas. In addition, they consumed warmed beer or ale. This was not the strong drink we know today, but a thick, nutritious beverage more like liquid bread. When warmed, it provided warmth and extra calories. This inner fire was as important a part of getting ready for bed as a wool blanket. It was impossible to warm up in even the best bed if the body did not have the fuel to generate its own heat. The Vikings intuitively understood that the fight against the cold was fought on 2 fronts. On the outside, with walls, wool and fur, and on the inside, with fatty, hot and high-calorie food. Winter in Scandinavia is not only extremely cold, but also almost 24 hours of polar darkness. The sun could not appear for weeks. This long, oppressive darkness was no less of a challenge than the frost. People spent long nights in the closed, dimly lit space of a longhouse. The main source of light was still the central hearth. It not only provided warmth, but also dispelled the darkness. It was a time for slow, meditative activities. Men could repair their tools or carve wood or bone. Women spun wool and wove, their looms tapping rhythmically in the dim light.
Wrestled the beast for 3 days and nights before finally...
What happened then?
Silence, child. Let the man finish his tale.
But the main activity that saved people from despair was communication. Long winter evenings were a time for storytelling. It was then that the great sagas of gods and heroes were born and passed down from mouth to mouth. This was not just entertainment. Storytelling, singing, and shared rituals strengthened social bonds and gave people a sense of community. The feeling that you were not alone in this endless darkness was a powerful psychological factor in survival. Preparing for bed was an important daily ritual. It was not just a routine, but a sequence of actions that gave a sense of control over a hostile environment. Everyone knew their role in this process. Some made sure the hearth was put into night mode. The coals were covered with ashes so that they would smolder until morning, but not produce an open flame. Others brought hot stones and placed them under the sleeping benches. Still others checked that the entrance doors were tightly closed so that there would be no drafts. Every evening, beds were ritually made and blankets were checked. These repetitive, meaningful actions were reassuring. They gave confidence that everything had been done correctly and that the night would pass safely. A peaceful sleep was only possible when every inhabitant of the house was confident in the reliability of their shelter, that the walls would withstand the wind, the roof would not leak, and there would be enough fire and heat until dawn. Thus, the warmth in a Viking house was not the result of any one secret. It was a whole system where architecture, technology, materials, food, and even social psychology worked as a single, coordinated mechanism. We can see that surviving the winter was a real art for the Vikings, based on a deep understanding of nature. Their ice houses weren't just homes, but complex engineering systems. From multi-layered turf walls to the genius idea of stone heaters, everything was designed for one purpose: to keep in precious heat. Wool was their real gold, and the art of layering clothing and bedding allowed them to create individual cocoons of warmth. But the main secret was the power of community. They warmed each other with their body heat, proving that it was impossible to survive alone in such conditions. It was a daily, methodical struggle in which no detail was insignificant. Every splinter for the hearth, every scrap of wool, every hot stone was a contribution to the common victory over the cold. What other aspects of Viking or other ancient cultures would you like us to explore? Perhaps you are interested in their seafaring, crafts, or belief systems. Suggest your topics in the comments, and we will definitely make new episodes about them. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on research about how our ancestors survived in a world that was much harsher than ours.